This is The Strategic Leader, the podcast that helps people-focused leaders to think, act, and feel more strategic. And in this Series 5, we are exploring Tales from the Top Table. We're looking at the senior leadership team, what's involved in operating strategically in that team, and we've got both guests and our own perspectives to share, and we hope you find it useful. Hi, and welcome back to The Strategic Leader with me, Gemma Bullivant.
And with me, Fee Craig.
And Fee, we've had some great conversations so far relating to the theme for our series, which is Tales from the Top Table. What does it really mean to be in a senior leadership team? We know that taking a helicopter view is useful, and that is in service of being strategic. So we're going to take a helicopter view at how to be strategic in the senior leadership team scenarios. What do we need to be aware of? What do we need to ensure is in place? Well, what might happen that gets in the way of being strategic? So, Fee, do you want to kick us off with your thoughts initially on this and what you've noticed and how we can maybe explain this in a way that's going to be helpful?
Yeah, thanks, Gem. I think it's a really important one because we make an assumption, don't we, that the minute we've got kind of people sitting around a table with big job titles, whether that's kind of CFO, CPO, CTO, CEO, or just head of this, head of that, head of the other, that we automatically are going to have strategic level conversations. And actually, it can be a bit of a surprise when that doesn't happen. There can be a real magnetic pull back to the tactical. And we've been listening to guests so far this series, and then also building in our own experience of working with teams and being on teams to understand what does get in the way. And we've got a model, haven't we? It's maybe slightly hastily put together, but I think it packs a punch. We've got a model to share with you. And this model is not in the form of a list. This model, if you will, is in the form of a flower. So we've got some petals around the outside. And then we've got that bit in the middle of the flower. Full disclosure, neither Gem nor I knew what that was actually called. So, Gem, what did you call that bit in the middle?
I called that the bee landing zone.
the bee landing, the bit in the middle of the flower where the bee lands. So, picture, if you will, a nice flower with some petals. There are some things that we think stops teams from being strategic. And then there's something in the middle that holds all of those things together, which might be another reason, but it doesn't work on its own and the others don't work without it. So hence we need all of these things. So let's look at the petals, shall we? Let's start with petal number 1. I think what's really interesting is if you ask a team how much time they spend being strategic versus being tactical, or sometimes in a team coaching context, I ask teams how much time they spend on the hamster wheel versus off the hamster wheel. It's very interesting to try and put a percentage figure on that. I was with a team probably a couple of years ago now, and I asked them the question, you've got operational handle turning, which is on the hamster wheel, the day job, the BAU, the stuff that you kind of have to get done, versus, bearing in mind this is a senior leadership team, and they've got a very big team of about 150 people that sit below them, versus how much time you spend being strategic, thinking further into the future, thinking broader, thinking kind of bigger. And they proudly told me that they would spend upwards of 95% on the hamster wheel. So 95%, Gemma's eyes are wide open with disbelief. 95% of their time is spent in just doing the day job. And so less than 5% of their time and their headspace and their brain space is spent on strategic things. And I was like, okay, I can see how that happens, but if you're not doing it, who is? That's the question I always come back to. If you're not tackling these big strategic questions, who is? Where are they getting talked about? And it was a question they'd never considered before. And I think the point is, this first petal is about awareness. Do you have a picture of how much time you're spending on the day job, on the BAU, on tackling your inbox, fighting the fires, and versus how much time you'll spend thinking more strategically, so further into the future with a broader perspective? And could you put a figure on that as a team? And where do you think the right answer should be? I don't think there is a right answer, is there? What do you think about this?
No, I mean, we touched on the split of strategic work versus operational work in one or two of the conversations that we've had so far. I remember
Mm,
one with
mhm.
Davinia Knowles, who looks at the COO role.
Yeah,
So if you've not caught that episode yet, have a dig back into earlier in this series, because she reckoned that 65% was doing and 35% was thinking.
yeah.
In other words, doing that strategic work. But and you know, that's an interesting ratio. I don't necessarily agree or disagree with it. I think your point there is that we have to at least choose what we think is the right ratio or the what is going to be right for us, and we need that awareness. Petal number 1 is awareness. Are we actually bringing this into our consciousness, into our conscious thinking, or are we sleepwalking our way through these meetings? Are we aware of the extent to which we need to operate? Let's go back to one of our earlier analogies. How much time do we need to spend on the balcony? How much time do we need to spend on the dance floor?
Mm,
And are we aware of how much time we are spending in those two areas? And this is, I think, critical. I think awareness is critical to so many things to do with effective and strategic leadership. And so I'm really glad we start here because it is an essential
mm.
part of this whole equation. This flower can't be a flower without petal number 1 of awareness.
No, that's right. And it might just be that you take that question into your leadership team and just have a conversation. How much time do you think we are spending individually? Is it similar? Is it wildly different between the different members of that team? And how much
Mm.
should it be? Looking at your role profile, looking at your job description, how much of that is strategic leadership and how much of that is handle turning? And see if
And
you can put
and
some sort of figure, whatever's meaningful to you. Is it like, well, kind of 1 day a week broadly, or 4 days a month? Or that would give you about 20%, wouldn't it? If we're going for 35%, then it's 2 days a week or 4 or 8 days a month. So just sort of finding some meaningful balance that you can perhaps agree on. Maybe you don't all need to be the same, but just having a conversation about it might be a starting point to raise that awareness.
yeah, brilliant. And we'll come back to this when we get to the B landing zone that this petal is attached to. And at some stage, somebody will tell us what that B landing zone is called. So petal number 2, Fee, what's the second thing that you would consider important for us to focus on
Yeah.
here?
Well, the second thing is time, right? Time.
Mm,
Because the thing that we hear kind of more than anything else is we haven't got time for that, or there aren't enough hours in the day, or we don't get together often enough, or, there are too many other priorities. And, that's legit. You can see why that happens. You hear it all the time. I know that I will have made those same excuses myself, but we've got to admit that they are actually excuses, aren't they? Because if you're on a senior leadership team, you have to be thinking ahead of where you are now and shaping that future and taking some kind of control over that future rather than being stuck in the work that you're in now. Otherwise, that future is going to control you. So it's kind of, it has to happen. I guess it's a similar point to the previous one about awareness, which is if you're not planning that future, who is? And if the answer is nobody, then you've got to ask yourself, well, are you running the business or is the business running you? So in a way, I think this is it's kind of non-negotiable. You have to find the time. And then I guess a lot of the other petals in this one are in support of, well, how do you use that time? Because often we find some time, like an hour, and we waste that talking about something else. So all of these
mm,
petals kind of self-supporting in a way. It's all very well finding an hour with everybody together, but if you don't really know how to make best use of that hour or that day or whatever time you have managed to find, then it won't be effective and you will be less
mm.
inclined to find it again. So it isn't just time on its own, but time is a mission critical one. If you ask yourself the question, what can only you do? What has to be done by you? Then that will help you understand what needs to be passed down the chain a bit to free up some time.
Absolutely. And time is unquestionably part of this. And, we all know that most of us feel and to a large extent are time poor. And it's then what do you do with that so that you can put enough into that ratio that we talked about in the first petal, which is deciding how much of a split you have between being strategic and being operational. What is the most realistic, even if you have an ideal as to, 65-35% to use the earlier one, and actually that's just not gonna work because we haven't got the time available, then fine, but it can't be 100 and 0. That's
Yeah.
your point, not actually then nobody is being strategic in the interests of the business, because if not you, then who, as in terms of the team? So, they are interlinked. They are all part of the same flower, but the time question does form a critical part of this, because it also can be the lazy excuse. And actually there might be another way to sort this out. In other words, perhaps there's a way to delegate it. Perhaps there's a different way to address that point and not use the time of everybody that's in the room.
Mhm.
That interesting thing, wasn't there, where I can't remember which company it was, and I don't even know if we've touched on this in an earlier episode. There was a company that used to put the amount of money that a meeting was about to cost in
Mm.
terms of the combined hourly rate of the people that were participating or something, in such a way that it wasn't going to break any privacy, but to make the point that
Mm.
you've got a group of people in a room collectively costing the business quite a lot of money. And, the idea behind this was to kind of sharpen the mind on how best to use the time available in the best service of the company. Do you remember that?
Well, I do remember that. I don't remember it as an external company, but I know that I have asked that question if I'm observing team meetings as part of my team coaching work, and you've
Yeah.
got, say, 5 senior leaders. Particularly, I do a lot of work with marketing agencies, and it's quite easy to have a kind of billable hourly rate because that's how much you would bill your clients. So it's quite easy to do that. How much is this next hour gonna cost us? Or how much did that hour we've just had cost us? It's quite easy to put a figure on that. And it really does it really does sharpen the mind to say,
Mm.
what's it costing us? And I think if we look at the next petal, that because it really is impacted by time, the less time we have, the better our skills need to be. If we have got a really, really short amount of time, our strategic skills need to be really well polished so that we can get straight to it and we can do what's most impactful. If our strategic skills are not that good, then it's just going to take us longer and we need more time. So there's a real sort of relationship between time and skill. I absolutely remember coaching somebody, a really, really talented woman, and she was promoted and she was promoted. And she knew she had to take a slightly more strategic approach to leading her team. She'd inherited another team. So she had 2 teams to merge, needed to spend more time planning further ahead, thinking about succession planning, all sorts of things. She was struggling to find time in her calendar. And we were like, well, carving out the time, what's stopping you from carving out the time? So she successfully managed to carve out the time. And she would sit there with her laptop, kind of drumming her fingers on the desk, going, okay, I've cleared my diary. I'm now sitting here. What on earth am I supposed to do? What are those strategic activities I'm now supposed to be doing? And that was at that point of stepping out of operational and into strategic. So perhaps at that point, she wasn't on a leadership team. But it was a really interesting noticing in terms of it's all very well kind of finding the time. But if you don't actually know really, really clearly what you're going to do in that time, then it's really difficult to be efficient and make good use of it. So once we realized that, again, awareness, we were able to pinpoint exactly what needs to be done. And she has been thriving ever since. But that relationship between time and skill, the less time you've got, the more skills you need to have. So skills and experience can stop a team from being strategic because they don't quite know what to focus on, or you've got different levels of experience within the team. So only some people are able to contribute effectively to those strategic conversations and not everybody. Or everyone is trying their best, but is kind of floundering around a little bit and therefore being really and somewhat unsatisfactory. So there is there's a relationship between awareness and time. There's equally the relationship between time and skills and experience. What are the skill
Yes.
levels, experience levels of being strategic in the team? Does it fall to the same person or people each time? Or can everyone
Yeah.
be at the same level?
Yeah, and that's leading me to think about not just skills in terms of being strategic, the skills of being strategic, having that strategic muscle. I think it's also skills in terms of how you operate within the team and how the team operates itself. Because if you are the one that is noticing, in other words, pulling back to the awareness point, noticing that the conversation has drifted into the operational, and therefore you have the skills to bring that back and to actually hold the conversation in a different place for the group. There's a skill level involved in doing that in the right way, isn't there? Both in terms of noticing and actually kind of helping the team pull back to the right place for that conversation.
Yeah, you're so right. There is that skill of being able to, like you say, notice and set up that conversation so that it can be had in terms of how long are we going to spend on this, or where are we going to get to, or how are we going to make sure everybody's heard. That is a valuable skill within a senior, well, any team, but particularly a senior leadership team, in addition to the actual strategic work that you need to do.
And that's such an important point because I often coach people. I have people talk to me about feeling like they're not bringing something strategic to the meetings that they attend. And that's when it's in the definition of that is an idea or some content or the topic that's being discussed. I don't have anything to add to this. And what sometimes happens is that when we're talking about that and talking about how that shows up, is actually what you can be bringing to that is the ability and the strategic skill of holding the frame for that conversation for other people to put that content in, and that is incredibly important in the dynamic of a strategic leadership team, a senior leadership team, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'd also add skills like summarizing what's been said. Okay, so we've
Mm.
heard so far, this seems to be the main issue so far. Can I summarize it look like that? Are we all agreeing that that's our main challenge? I'd like to propose this as a solution. Are we all happy with that solution? Or we haven't heard from you. All of these things are strategic skills. And sometimes, that comes back to the three hats that we've talked about a number of times in this series. That very much sits in the realm of the third hat, which is your role, your kind of behavioral role in the team.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to be setting up the structure for those conversations to take place. That is a skill. It's a behavioral skill. It's not a kind of subject matter expertise skill, but it's a valuable skill in that team. So do you have those skills? And I guess
No.
that sort of even leans us slightly towards our fourth petal, which is about the culture or the team dynamics within that team. And do we have a behavioral norm of pulling our conversation up to a strategic level, or being able to kind of right size the conversation to make sure we're talking about the most important stuff in the best way? Is that a behavioral norm that you have? Or would that be a weird thing to do in your team environment? We talked to somebody quite recently. The team was pretty dominated, I think, by the CEO or by the founder culturally.
Mm.
And so most of the rest of the team would kind of wait to be told what the strategy was or what the action was or what we were going to do. And it wasn't culturally normal for somebody else to take the reins and go, so what are we going to do about this? Or I think today we should be talking about that. It kind of wasn't done. And there was a question, is it okay for me to sort of step into this space? Um,
Mm.
and so this is a bit more subtle, isn't it? This is really around the behavioral culture within the group or the team dynamics. Is that kind of strategic role dominated by somebody? Is it blocked by somebody? Do we have behavioral norms that allow us to go, hang on a second, I think we're getting a bit too in the weeds here. We're getting a bit too tactical. Let's just remember what we're supposed to be talking about, which is higher level. And
Yeah.
can we do that in such a way that it doesn't offend people or upset people if we've had to kind of cut them off or change a subject? Can we do it in a way that everyone's go, oh no, you're right, we've got to keep it really high level. You're right. Thanks for reminding us. So there's a lot of kind
Yeah.
of behavioral norms to consider because that can really stop a team from being properly strategic.
Absolutely. And yeah, I remember the conversation you're referring to there, and it's all in the same sort of theme, I suppose, as power dynamics and power imbalances. It's often the CEO, not always. It's either the CEO or it's somebody that is quite dominant for another reason, or maybe more senior for another reason if the room if the team that we're talking about isn't a C-suite. But there's often either a deference to authority and that is overplayed,
Uh-huh.
overstated in certain
Uh-huh.
team. And I mean, in my experience, the best way for that to be counteracted is for the person who holds that power to be quite clear that they don't want that power to influence the way that the conversation runs. But of course, in the most dysfunctional of teams, that actually is not addressed, and that power dynamic continues to over influence the way that the team does or participate and operate. What this is also speaking to, I can remember teams that I've been in where it sort of relates to the skills petal in a way, but it is also the dynamics of the team and what each person in the team brings. Is I don't know if you've had this fee, but I can think of times when I was in a team where nobody in the room really had the depth of experience needed to do the topic that we were discussing, service or justice,
Uh-huh.
and that what we really needed to do was perhaps press pause and bring somebody else in from somewhere else in the business that could bring some additional perspective or detail to help move the conversation along. That sometimes in these senior teams, there are representatives of areas that have a deeper functional expertise that that person themselves doesn't hold.
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
think there's something here about, and I suppose it speaks to awareness of that, but also skills and the dynamics of of how the team operates, that there isn't always the right the people in the room are not always the right people in the room to be discussing things that they need to discuss.
I think that's a really good point. I would add that to the in terms of the cultural team dynamics. I think that's kind of ego in a way to say, actually,
Mhm.
I don't know enough. Or,
Yeah.
we did an episode, I think it was series 3, we did an episode on what's the how do you move from having an opinion to actually creating a strategic viewpoint? And it can be the case if you don't actually genuinely have the right expertise or the right data in the room to talk about whatever it is that's kind of big and difficult.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
it can be that you resort to just having an opinion, just making up an opinion. I think it's this or I think it's that. And
yeah.
it can take a bit of boldness to say, do you know what? I'm not an expert. I don't know. I don't have an opinion on this. Can
Mm,
we go find some experts? Can we go and
mm,
find some more stuff?
yeah,
Get
yeah,
some more information. So I think maybe just that sense of ego might get in the way as well
yeah,
as part of the team dynamic, isn't it? Nobody really wants to admit that they don't actually know, and it might be better to pause, as you say, pause, get a couple of other people in, and then continue when we've got some experts in the room. So I think that's a
I
really
feel like we've thrown a fifth petal there, actually, ego and
that's a fifth petal. Well, I mean,
solid.
let's recap our petals, whether that's 4 or 5. We've got awareness. We have to be
Yes,
aware of how we're splitting our time. And then we have time, which is, do we have enough?
yes,
And if we've got enough, what are we going to do with it? Petal 3 is experience. And there's this tension between the more experienced and skilled we are, probably the less time we need, and vice versa. We've then got a petal on culture and or team dynamics, which is what are the behavioural norms that either help or hinder strategic thinking. Then we might have a fifth petal around ego, or do we have the right people in the room? But all of our petals are held together by this is the really exciting bit. All of our petals are held together by the bee landing zone. Now, any biologists out there, or perhaps even just some gardeners, will tell us what's the middle of a flower called, for heaven's sake. I'm keep thinking stamens, but stamens go underneath the petals, don't they? Oh, who knows?
I don't know, I don't know.
Anyway,
But yes, the
in
bee
the middle,
landing zone.
we have the bee landing zone, the bit of the flower that the bee lands on. So, what is Gem? You talk us through what is the bee landing zone that is not a petal in its own right, but it holds all the petals together?
Well, I like the idea of a bee landing zone because it's far more interesting than the word that I've come up with for what this area represents, which is architecture. So the architecture, which sounds a lot more boring, but the architecture in this context is the frame of the various meetings. What have we got defined purposes for all the different times that these people meet together, this team, this senior team, very expensive resource, meet at different points in time and have a different meeting cadence. And therefore, that purpose is really clearly defined. That's the meeting architecture. It's like a ways of working type approach. And it calls to mind, I can remember one or two companies I've worked in myself where we had very clear and very easy shortcut language because we had very clearly defined meetings for very specific purposes. So on a Monday morning, there was a weekly meeting, and that was very tactical. It was, what are we focusing on this week? This was our operational lens. We had a monthly that was longer. So that weekly was about an hour. The monthly was half a day, I think, or a day, might have even been a day, which was dedicated to things that need a bit longer to discuss, things to explore, strategic. So we are now on the balcony at the monthly meeting. And then we had a quarterly meeting, which was an even bigger, the big, hairy, strategic topics that needed longer than we could do service of at the monthly, or were thinking much more longer term, a much deeper set of scenarios and consequences, a wider strategic lens, let's call it. And the shortcut language that afforded us was when we started to get stuck in the weeds in a monthly meeting, we go, well, let's pause that and take that to our Monday morning. And if on the Monday morning we started to talk about something that was actually a lot bigger than we had the time for, and therefore we wouldn't have time to cover some urgent operational things that we needed to, we could signal that the monthly was the place to bring that conversation to. And that architecture really allowed us the opportunity to, let's say we are aware of that, let's say we've got the skills and we've got the time factor to be able to navigate all of that. We then have the architecture to be able to use really swiftly and really easily in the moment and say, let's take that to the Monday, or let's take that to the monthly.
I think that's really powerful, isn't it? That an agreement on those levels of conversations, and making sure that everywhere, every kind of conversation or every kind of challenge or thing that needs to be tackled has a place to go, because you can't tackle all of those things right now because you won't have the
Mm.
right people available. But I think that's really powerful to hear that example of where it works. I can think of an example within the last month where I was talking to a team. It was a very tactical, very specific discussion about one thing. It was very detailed. And in the middle of this conversation, somebody dropped in a fairly big statement about the culture of the organization. And it dropped like a grenade, and everyone was like, "Oh!" And they all ran after it. They all ran after this topic and started talking about it. And I was like, hold on a second. We have agreed we're talking about this very detailed, specific thing. That's come up. They ran after it again. I was like, no, 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 no. We're talking about the specific thing. We've got less than an hour now to talk and resolve this very specific thing that we were very clear we were going to talk about. Where do you want to put that? It's clearly important to you. It's clearly something you will want to discuss. Where are you going to put it? Where do you have kind of big, it felt like quite a big challenge to the culture of the organization? Was like, well, that felt like quite a big thing. Is it something that needs to be tackled? And if so, where are you going to put it? And there was no answer. So there was nowhere to put it, which meant that that grenade just stayed in that conversation. So we didn't finish the specific details thing that we had agreed we were going to do, because this cultural grenade had landed and messed everything up. But nor did they have enough time and
Mm.
set up effectively to tackle that, because they didn't have anywhere else to go. And what was also interesting is that they didn't quite understand the question that I'd asked them, which is, where would you put conversations like this? The answer might be in our monthly, or maybe in a quarterly thing, which is actually our culture does need addressing. Let's put that as a big agenda item on our next quarterly. So that idea of having places to put things, having that architecture of meetings, it demands all of the petals to be in place in a way. You need to be aware that you need to have those different conversations to set that up. So you need that
Mm,
awareness to be present. You need to dedicate the time. So the time bit needs to be present, or it's a way of tackling the time. You need to have the experience and the skills to be able to make good use of those things and say,
mm,
well, actually, some people are probably better at leading the weekly Monday one. Some people will be better at leading the monthly or the quarterly. Let's play to that experience skill levels. And then behaviorally, in terms of culture and team dynamic, we need to be able to, as you say, use that language of this feels like a quarterly conversation. Let's put it in that pot. This feels
mm,
like a tactical now thing. Let's tackle that one now. And for that behaviorally to be okay to say, we're not going to talk about that now, but it sounds important, so let's put it in a really good place to talk about. And
mm.
that's a draw thing. So that's why it sits in the middle. That's why it's our bee landing zone, right in the middle of our flower, because it doesn't exist on its own, and it really impacts all of the other
Yeah.
petals that sit around it. So there we have our model of the week, which is a flower this week. But I don't think we've had a flower before, have we, in our
Mm.
models? It's quite a nice change. So have a think about all of those petals and that bee landing zone. See which ones are working for you in your team and which ones need a bit of thought. It's always a pleasure, Jem, to come up with a model with you. Thank you to all our listeners. Thanks for listening. I hope you've taken something really valuable from it today, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Strategic Leader. We'd love it if you could subscribe or maybe share with a colleague or just leave us a quick review.
And if you have a big, hairy question you'd like us to explore, or perhaps a strategic dilemma you're wrestling with, just drop us a line, gemma@gemmabullivant.co.uk.
And remember, having a strategic viewpoint doesn't necessarily mean having all the answers. It's more about asking better questions, broadening your view, and staying curious.
We'll see you next time.